Thank you for that wonderful introduction. So, okay, start na ta. Alright, so i-share sana ako akong screen. Right, so okay na ba? Kita.
Yes.
Alright, so at least kikita na. Right, so our assigned book for our OT survey is the First Samuel, Old Testament survey for the book of First Samuel. So, starting with the title, Yahweh, the Sovereign God, King of Kings in the land of Israel. So why you chose this title? You will know. Or maybe some of you already know. So yeah. Okay. Right? So overview and background. Okay, so we will start with overview and background. So the first two books. So the first so First Samuel is the first of the two historical books of the Old Testament that covers the nation of Israel's transition from loose tribal form of government to a united kingship under Saul and David. Okay. So first, hindi pa siya parang from tribal system to monarchy na system of government. Kumbaga, may hintulad hahahintulad siya sa England na merong monarchy. Although wala namang prime minister sa panahon diyan. So ganyan, basta ganun yung parang setup niyan. Okay, the books are named for the prophet Samuel who anointed these two leaders. So namely are this Saul and David. Okay. First Samuel covers the lives of the prophet Samuel and King Saul, introducing David as a warrior and a successor to the throne. Okay, so ito yung mga so those are the overview and background for the book of First Samuel. So authorship and date. Like all other biblical historians, the author of the book of Samuel remains anonymous even though pangalan niyang nakalagay sa book. Hindi natin pwedeng sabihin na siya yung author. So just like other books na notice natin sa Old Testament and the following books pa to come. Samuel was originally one book. However, probably due to the great length of the material, the book was divided into in the Septuagint into two parts. So Septuagint again, Greek translation for the Old Testament. So Septuagint. So these are called First and Second Kingdoms or First and Second Samuel. So originally First Samuel was one book. So kumbaga kung i-apply pa natin sa version natin ng Bible ngayon, makikita natin na Samuel lang. But it's not like it happened. So hinati kasi sobrang laki. The first part ends with the death of Saul. Okay. So death of Saul, and the second is largely devoted to the reign of David. Okay, second, yung first book. So that's why if you notice, you will notice later, we might cover some few facts about the second Samuel as well. So baka naman notice natin na ma-cover natin yung some of the facts or truth about the second Samuel, so second book. So that's why, the reason why is that the first and second Samuel was originally one book. So yun. The book is named after the first major character in the narrative. Samuel's birth is recorded in the first chapter, and his death in 1 Samuel 25 makes it impossible that he wrote the entirety of the book. So ito yung evidence na hindi si Samuel ang nagsulat. So because na-record din mismo sa 1 Samuel na yung araw kung yung kailan siya namatay si Samuel. So in other words, ito yung parang naging palatandaan na hindi talaga si Samuel or Prophet Samuel ang nagsulat ng book. Okay. So, continue. The Talmud attributes to 1 Samuel to chapter 1 to 24 to Samuel, while the rest has been connected with Nathan and God. Right? First Samuel begins with the birth and call of the prophet Samuel. Okay. So, ito yung parang yung first chapter because yung nanay ni Samuel was barren, so yun nagsimula yung, and then Samuel was the result of the earnestly or seeking of that woman para magkaroon siya ng anak. So Samuel yung naging parang miraculous son ng isang barren woman in that first chapters of the book. Okay. And Second Samuel ends near the close reign to David. So yun. However, the final form of First Samuel does not date from the time at which the events recorded took place. Ano ibig sabihin nito? Ibig sabihin nito is that hindi hindi na natapos ang Book of Samuel sa time kung saan nangyari talaga yung event. In other words, kumbaga sabihin natin si Bro Obed, may nag-observe sa kanya and then sinulat ni record na si Bro Obed ay kumain ng pandesal. So not in that time of event na kung saan kumain si Bro Obed ng pandesal, doon talaga na record yung record na yun. So maybe later time pa. So yun parang nagawa ang First Samuel after na nangyari yung event sa First Samuel. Some of the material does originate from date of the event, such as David eulogies for Saul and Jonathan and his lament for Abner. So yung eulogies ni David is also some of the material na nagawa, natapos sa event talaga kung saan nangyari talaga yung event. Thus, the final composition relies on annals, poems, and stories that comes from earlier period. So yung final competition, kung in other words, or in thus, yung First Samuel is nagawa siya pagkatapos ng mga events na na-record sa book. Right? Parang ganun. The text itself provides enough proof that the final composition of the books is later than the events recorded. So sinabi ko kanina. So ito yung mga palatandaan na sa book. To this day, or similar expression to author is narrating events that had occurred. Okay, to this day. So ito yung one of the line na if you will notice as you read the First Samuel. Okay, so another is yung Second Samuel. Yun din. Right. So situation in which a number of kings have ruled over Judah since the death of Solomon. And then another is division of united monarchy into two kingdoms. Okay. We will not touch that. Okay. So the author explains the custom of the early monarchy period because they are no longer used during this time. Okay. So again, all evidence suggests that the final editing of the two books occurred after some kings of Judah reigned in 9th and 8th centuries BC. Okay, so it is reasonable to believe that the official historian wrote First and Second Samuel within 1 or 2 centuries of the events. Okay. So there's no compelling reason to think that the two books were given a final form in exilic or post-exilic period. So again, a final form is exilic means yung the time where the people of Israel were exiled, meaning wala sila sa native land nila, or post-exilic meaning tapos na yung exile period nila, meaning nandun na sila sa land nila. So it is compelling to yun. So ganun. Next, historical settings. So third part. Historical settings. The book points out the work of the king as Israel becomes a monarchy. Okay, we refer this to our God. It begins at a time when the 12 tribes of Israel had been long violating the rules, ethics, and virtues of leadership that God had laid out for them. So you can see these virtues, rules, and ethics are stated in Genesis and throughout the Deuteronomy. So nandun yung mga virtues, but it has been violated by the Israelites. So after almost 200 years of increasingly bad governance by a succession of judges, temporary leaders, Israel is in a state of total disorder. Okay, total disorder dahil sa bad governance. Samuel narrates God's intervention in Israel's governance as his people move from failing tribal confederation to a promising monarchy which declines into failure as succeeding generations of kings abandon God and His ways. Okay, so ito yung parang naging setting ng ito yung setting ng First Samuel. Okay. So first nakita natin sa previous books na the Israelites continually disobeyed under the governance of the judges or temporary leaders. Okay, kumbaga yung tribals under the tribal system before. So ngayon they are result in total disorder. Kaya naman this is when, or the book of Samuel states, narrates that this is when God intervene and by selecting or by selecting a leader or for them. But some of the promising leaders, the two promising leader that we were going to encounter natin sa book, mabasa natin, are somehow may ups and down, and first one is yung parang mayroon talagang grabe talaga yung errors niya. So ganun yung parang ganun yung parang mag-encounter natin sa book. So next, structure. In the Hebrew Bible, First Samuel and Second Samuel are single books. So sinabi ko na kanina na single book lang sila. Or it might be better entitled as the Book of David, since its main character is David and not Samuel. The book tells the story of David's life. Okay, its purpose is to demonstrate that David was a man after God's own heart, or God's heart. David was the Lord's rightful choice for Israel's throne. Okay, the book also composed of series of larger sections, each focusing on each one era or theme in David's life. The number of such sections is generally seen as a half dozen. So kaya naman, this is one of the reason na hinati yung books. Actually din, we can also connect, kumbaga continuation din actually yung hindi lang yung First Samuel, yung Second Samuel na continuation ng First Samuel, but continuation din yung Chronicles and yung Kings. So continuation din siya ng life of David. Parang yung apat or yung mga books na mention is parang nandun talaga yung narrative ni David. Okay. Kumbaga sa First Samuel nagsimula yung life ni David. Yun. How God raised David as king. Okay. Next. So ito yung mga structures na makikita natin specifically for the First Samuel. So matatouch din natin yung Second Samuel dito, but i-highlight ko na lang yung First Samuel. So first part of the book is the birth of and rule of Samuel. Okay. Second, Saul's reign, failure and rejection by God. Third, David in Saul's court. Fourth, David as a political fugitive. Fifth, David as king over Israel and his kindness to Saul's family. So nasa nasa na yan, 2 Samuel makikita. So abangan natin. So another outline is that ito rin, the beginning of the Davidic kingship. Okay. So ito, transition to kingship, 1 Samuel to 31. So A, sa Samuel, a judge who anointed kings, 1 Samuel 1 to 8. B, Samuel to Saul, a failed king, 1 Samuel 9 to 15. C, Saul to David, the dynastic founder of 1 Samuel 16 to 31. And David's reign as Israel's first king, makikita natin yan siya sa 2 Samuel. So kapag gusto niyo malaman paano nagsimula ang 1 Samuel, nagsimula si David as king, makikita natin siya sa 1 Samuel. But if you know, if gusto niyo malaman kung paano nag-reign si David, paano niya ginovern ang Israelites, makikita natin siya and malalaman natin yan sa 2 Samuel. Okay, we will read 2 Samuel. Purpose. Okay, purpose. The main purpose of this book is to record the establishment of kingship in Israel and to explain its theological significance. So ano ang advantage? Ano yung parang naging significant changes compared sa previous type of government? Kumbaga, communism dati, ngayon the most democratic, parang ganun. So we will not touch in the politics. So yun. Again, ganito. So to record the establishment of kingship in Israel. Sub-purposes are these are the sub-purposes to define the monarchy as God's grace to Israel. Second, to teach the causes and effects of various human responses to the grace of God. And third, to demonstrate God's sovereignty and to show that He provides leadership to His people. So those are the main purposes, or the main purpose and sub-purpose. Okay. Unique features. So ano yung parang makikita natin sa book na wala ang ibang book? Anong makikita natin sa 1 Samuel na as we read the book? Okay, so unique features, the narratives of since sinabi ko kanina na yung the book of Samuel is 1 Samuel is parang whole book lang siya, so maka-counter matatakal din natin yung 2 Samuel as well. So kasi parang continuation lang siya sa book of 1 Samuel. So again, so as we read the 1 Samuel and as well as the 2 Samuel, they are written in economical styles using a variety of narrative techniques. Okay, keywords, comparative characterization, repetition, and variation, and analogy. Okay, comparative characterization, compared kung sino yung mas maganda, sino yung mas gwapo, sino yung mas maayos na leader. So, Saul ba or si David? All right. Okay. So next is sensitivity to such literary features can open the door to theological and historical understanding and to a sense of unity of the text. Okay, if you are sensitive enough, makikita mo talaga kung ikaw ay nagmamine ng knowledge or revelation from the Lord, if you will notice this unique features, you will really see you will really discover new gems, or you will really discover new nuggets of gold of knowledge and revelation from the Lord. Okay, so taking into account or taking note of these features. Oh, yun, tama na. Just like Bro Obed said, for example, Saul is being compared to David. Oh, you will really see what is their difference. So later on, may kita natin yan mamaya. Meron tayong ipe-present na a figure or chart mamaya. So we'll see how example. Next tayo is the overall literary structure of the two books is deliberate comparison and contrast between the lives and kingship of Saul and David. Okay, the lives and kingship of Saul and David. So, manonotice talaga natin sa 1 Samuel and even to 2 Samuel yung comparison. Kino-compare talaga. You will really see the comparison. Although there are some also, but I will do not also neglect yung mga ibang part ng book, of course. Like first part, syempre. In general way, the narratives of two kings run parallel after ascending to the throne. Both characters had early military success. Okay, so both characters, David and Saul. So, yun. So you can see this is the note the comparison. This is the figure that we have. So see the difference. Diba? So ano yung difference? Pero ano yung as you can see first glance makikita natin na marami silang similarities, but at the last part there is one difference. The first part. So first is sa buhay ni Saul, may early success karon din kay David. So makikita natin sa 2 Samuel. 1 Samuel naman makikita natin yung malalaman natin ano yung sin, ano yung ginawang sin ni Saul. Okay, so he committed grievous sin. Ganun din sa 2 Samuel. Malalaman na si David din ay nakakommit ng grievous sin. But the last part, in comparison nilang dalawa, is that Saul is become bitter and seek revenge, and dun naging characteristic niya yung jealousy. So in other words, he rejects God totally. But sa David naman, sa life ni David, after committing grievous sin, and makikita talaga natin ito sa Book of Psalms, how sorrowful or how he repented to God. Makikita natin siya sa Psalms. Makita how sorrowful he is. So dito naman yung difference is si David is in sorrow and repentance. Unlike kay Saul na he became bitter and full of revenge and jealousy. So in other words, he turned back to God, si David, but Saul rejected God. Okay. So, however, these were soon followed by grievous sin. So, yun, continue na yun. Both rulers. So, the similarity ends at the point because of the divergent ways in which two kings dealt with their sin. Okay, so this is how. So again, yung pinagkaiba, to be precise, yung pinagkaiba is, the pinagkaiba ni Saul and David is that how they deal with their sin. Okay, Saul deal his grievous sins through bitterness and revenge and jealousy, but David deal his sins through sorrow and repentance. Okay, so kayo, how do we deal with sin? Okay, so then next, so specific advice in reading. So merong unique features. Ngayon naman, specific advice as we read the 1 Samuel. Wow, sabi ni Kuya Dens, revenge daw. Revenge daw yung response ni. Para kaninong revenge kaya yan? Alright. Kaninong revenge? Para kanino yan, Sir Dens? Alright. So, madako na tayo sa next. Let us proceed to specific advice in reading. So, as we read the book of First Samuel, ano yung kailangan nating i-keep? Ano yung kailangan nating gawin? Okay, advice. Okay. So, parang dagdag lang siya sa unique features that we are going to look out for. So, next is, we'll notice the following. So, kingship and covenant. Okay, you will notice the nangingibabaw yung theme ng kingship and covenant sa book. So God, as we read, God established a political system in Israel led by human king according to 1 Samuel. Before the author described his momentous change in the structure of the theocracy, God's kingly rule over his people, he effectively depicts the complexity of its context. Okay, so mas komplikado, hindi simple ang pagiging leader. We can see that right now even in our time. Okay, so next, be aware of few Deuteronomic themes. The book of Samuel is particularly concerned with transitions from periodic, partial rule of judge to an institutionalized hereditary monarchy. Okay, so as Noah, 'di ba? So yung sa time kaya naman kaya naman nasabi nating Deuteronomic themes siya because yung standard. So tama. Sabi niya ni Brobed yung standard. Yun. So yun ang maging standard kaya naging theme. Parang ganun yung parang you will notice na parang same siya. Same yung parang naging yung standard ng kuan. Yung standard na siniset sa Deuteronomy. So medyo yung pronunciation. Next. All of this is brilliantly told with wit, irony, suspense, and word play, but most importantly with an eye to what God is doing with and among his people. Okay. So maraming maraming ways na nilahad maraming ways ang ginamit dito sa paglahad or pag-narrates ng story. So it can be suspense, bako sa movie pass. Okay. So yun. Can be suspense. Kung sa mga movies, parang ganun lang din yung parang yung naging themes dito. Okay. Specific. Next is note how tension lies at the heart of contrasting stories of Saul and David. The question for our narrator in the end is not whether Israel will have a king, but what kind of king they will have. The key question here is whether the king will be both faithful to Yahweh and exhibit Yahweh's characters, because whatever else is true about Israel's king, he is to be earthly representative of Yahweh's own kingship over Israel. Okay, so we will see. Ito yung parang naging tension sa narrative. Okay, parang naging key themes. Also, you will also take note of how Hannah's prayer anticipate at least two motifs of the story. Okay, so nakita natin yung Hannah's prayer sa first part of the book. Okay, as you can see, God blesses the weak, not the strong. God will guide the strength to his king. Okay. Well, God will give strength to his king. Okay, yun mali. Yun so ganun. Key verses. Okay, dito na tayo sa key verses. Alright, so Wait for a while. Key verses tayo. Right? Okay, so these are the key verses that we had. Okay, but when they said, give us a king to lead us, this displeased Samuel. So he prayed to the Lord, and the Lord told him, listen to all that people are saying to you. It is not you that they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king, as they have done from the day I brought them out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods. They are doing to you. Okay, next is 1 Samuel 8:19 to 22. But the people refused to listen to Samuel. No, they said, we want a king over us. Then we shall be like all other nations with a king to lead us and to go out before us and fight our battles. When Samuel heard all the people said, he repeated it before the Lord. The Lord answered, listen to them, give them a king. Give them a king. Then Samuel said to the Israelites, everyone go back to your own town. First Samuel chapter 8, verse 19 to 22. Okay, so First Samuel 15, chapter 15, verse 22 to 23. But Samuel replied, does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divinate, divination, and arrogance like evil of idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of God or the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. Okay, so yun ang ating mga key verses that na nakala. Okay? Next, mega themes. So mega themes na tayo. 9, this is the 9th part. So these are as we read the book of Samuel throughout 2 Samuel, we will notice yung theme talaga ng Samuel. First is king. God appointed a king. Right? For a while, just wait. All right? So, second, God's control. God's ultimate control over Israel. Okay, in spite na Israel is being defeated by other tribes and being they conquered, still in this part of the book, God really demonstrates how he is sovereign and how great he is. Next, leadership. God's guidance to his appointed leaders. Obedience. Obedience is better than sacrifice. Wholehearted obedience is greater than rituals and tradition. So this is very profound. This is very, I think for me, is transformative truth. As we read the book of Samuel throughout 2 Samuel as well. Another is God's faithfulness. God's faithfulness to his people. So another theme that we will see here is how God is faithful to his people, even though these people, the Israelites, do not look this way, that way. Because kasi natalo sila ng ibang race. But still, in this chapter, in this book, we can really see, if you read this one, we will really see how God ruled, how God is faithful, how God demonstrates his faithfulness towards his people. So first king, the people of Israel desired a ruler because their priests and government courts were corrupt. They desired to be organized in the same way as the neighboring countries. God appointed a monarch for them, despite the fact that it was against his original plan. So take note, it was against his original plan. But still, God listened to his disobedient people. And even though it deviate, o mga hindi talaga according to his original plan. Okay. So, kahit na labag sa kanya, God always, in this way, God is is really faithful talaga. Kahit, diba? So, sa ika nga sabi ni Bro Obed dito is, what if God, what if, what if God was waiting to make David king, but the people couldn't wait, or not. So, nice thought. Pwede. Baka naman hindi talaga si Saul yung karapat dapat, hindi talaga dapat mangyari yung si Saul na naging king. But supposedly talaga si David talaga yung first king ng Israel in a monarchy, or in the first monarchy type na government. Baka naman ganun talaga yung original plan. So, nice thought. Bro. Okay. And continue, Israel's issues were not solved by becoming a monarchy. As we read the book, we'll notice that it's not really the answer, because as we notice that, as we can see this one, as we see the purpose, we'll try to answer the purpose of why does the Israelite wants a king. So they have, as we notice, that they have the wrong motive. They have the wrong motive of their desire. Okay. And we can see as we read the book, we can see na hindi talaga yung answer, na hindi talaga si David, or hindi talaga si Saul ang pintuan para maging successful yung Israel, or to follow what really God wants. Ganun talaga yung para ma-experience yung plans, God's plan for them. Ganun. Another theme that we will notice is God's control. As long as the people saw God as their actual monarch, Israel flourished. Okay. God interfered in the leaders' personal lives and overruled their conduct when they disobeyed God's commandments. God was able to maintain complete control over Israel in this way. Okay, even though iba naman talaga yung naging leader, o iba like si Israel, like, although okay, so although iba, hindi naman hindi although si David or si Saul ang leader, especially si David, puto ko sa kay David. So even though si David ang naging leader, God shows na he is the true king, or the King of Kings of Israel, by intervening in David's life. Even when we can't see what he's doing, God is always at work in this world. Our circumstances are ultimately in God's power, no matter what kinds of pressures we have to deal with. We can confront difficult events in our lives with the confidence, because we are confident in God's sovereignty. Okay, so parang ganito na yung theology na to. Yan, merong note dito. Next is leadership. Another theme that we will notice is leadership. God led his people through many forms of leadership: judges, priests, prophets, and kings. Those who God appointed for these various positions, such as Eli, Samuel, Saul, and David, exhibited various leadership styles. Regardless of the position, leadership style, wisdom, age, or power, each leader's success was determined by his dedication to God. Oh, this is very profound, guys, diba? Regardless of style, uh, each leader's true success was determined by by his dedication to God. Okay. All right. Next, when Eli, Samuel, Saul, and David defied God, horrible consequence followed. Of course, when they accomplished for God, and how some of them reared their children were both influenced by sin. Okay, so ito yung actually what they accomplished for God. What they accomplished for God, and how some of them reared children. Okay, so to be true leader, you must follow, or you must allow God to direct all your activities, values, and ambitions, including how you raise your children. O sa mga parent dyan, this is really uh, this is really ad, great advice or great truth. Okay. O, sa mga soon to be parent. Okay. Fourth is another theme that we will notice in throughout the book is obedience is greater than sacrifice. So, bro, but already take note of this. Yun, nasa sa chat. So again, obedience is greater than sacrifice. In God's eyes, he desired that his people obey, serve, and follow him with all their hearts, not just surface devotion based on rituals or traditions. Okay. So yun, very obvious naman talaga yung message ng obedience, or what the ng paragraph naman. So again, obedience is greater than sacrifice. Although we're no longer bound by Jewish law systems, we can nevertheless rely on outward observance to replace interior devotion. All of our labor and worship should be driven through heartfelt devotion to God. Yes, of course. Amen. Surface devotion to God. Okay, so take note of this. So next is God's faithfulness. God faithfully fulfilled his promise to Israel. He showed loving, charity, and speedy justice to his people. He faithfully worked in the best interest of his people by demonstrating kindness. He was true to his word, and he had a faithful moral disposition when came to demonstrating justice. So in other words, he has a God is really faithful, even kahit na even though he hindi pala, God is really faithful to the point na he even acknowledged the Israelite request kahit na hindi naman hindi naman according to his original plan. So grabe ka faithful si Lord. But of course, yung pinaka evidence na faithful si God in how he fulfilled, or how he demonstrate justice to his people. We can count on God to be kind to us because he is loyal. He is loyal. God on the other hand is righteous and will not allow disobedience against him. His altruistic love and fidelity should motivate us to devote our entire lives to him. Never takes his kindness for granted. Right, so last part, I think this will be our last part, theology. Okay, first theology, Lord established a dynasty or house in Israel for David. One of the central themes of the book of Samuel is how the Lord established dynasty or house in Israel for David rather than Saul. In terms of politics, Israel at the beginning of First Samuel was a federation of feeble, feeble tribal territories that were loosely controlled and were only barely able to keep the Palestine and over the enemies at bay. Okay. Next is Davite Covenant. The sovereign God who has guided David's life chooses David as the ruler of God's people. God pledges to David an eternal covenant. Second Samuel, makita natin siya sa Second Samuel. So however, by the conclusion of Second Samuel, David Israel had grown into most powerful monarchy in Eastern Mediterranean, strong at home and secure abroad. So yung parang ganun. As we will see it in the Second Samuel. Next, God chose Jerusalem as the place where David's successor would be established, the temple house for the worship of the divine king. Next is the promise of Messiah. Okay, so we will also notice the Song of Hannah in a pragmatic in this regard. So makita din natin dito yung Song of Hannah. Okay, so yun. And last part is failure of human kingship. So we will also notice the theology of failure of human kingship. In Israel, the offices of king and prophet emerged at the same time. Samuel, who stands at the top of the prophetic line, anointed Saul. Okay. So yun. Alright, so yun. Next is, okay. Okay, William Shakespeare stated that uneasy lies the head that wears a crown. Royal privilege are frequently outweighed by seemingly insurmountable challenges. When the siege is lifted, family members betray one another. When favoritism fades and terror lenses, the envious sons revolt. At such moments, psalms of appeal and grief are penned and sung. And after everything is said and done, David's towering presence continues to both draw and repel. We give him proper reverence. Okay. Okay. So we give him proper reverence because he is the Lord's anointed. He is insulted from mundane things and ignorant to his people's needs. Nevertheless, we blame him for not upholding the greatest possible standard because of his divine. Okay, so yun. Okay. Okay. Okay, so Saul's rise and fall were tied to his people adherence and to on abandonment of the law as revealed to him by Samuel. See, likewise, David fortunes rose as he followed Yahweh but sank quickly after Bathsheba appeared. So yun na yun. Thus, the Deuteronomic dichotomy of the blessing for obedience and punishment for sin pervades the book. Something else centers the picture, however, something that hints of the gospel. Okay. David commit crimes that are worthy of death, but he does not die. His sin is transferred to another who dies in his place. So David's sin is egregious, but God does not cut him off. His rule will be diminished, but his dynasty remains intact. He suffers from private and public shame, but still Yahweh gives him victory over his enemies, including those who from his own house. Thus, there is an element of grace that occasionally bubbles through the Deuteronomistic parade of crime and punishment. Even in sin, even in darkness, there is hope. There is a future. In the books of Samuel, Israel is constantly in crisis, the crisis of kingship, the crisis of Palestine threat, the crisis of the lost ark, the crisis of faulty leadership. So ito yung parang naging ano. Yet, in times of crisis, lessons for life emerge. The loss of the ark becomes a lesson in entrusting Yahweh's power. The failure of Saul becomes a lesson for David. The failures of David speak to the future generations. Individuals also face times of crisis. Young Samuel hears the voice of God. Young David hears the taunts of Goliath. A more mature David is caught between Saul and Philistine. A much older David flees from insurgency led by his own son. In these times of crisis, faith emerges. Samuel answers God's call. David trusts in Yahweh's sufficiency. Israel in exile and all leaders hence learn from these examples that God can still be trusted. Faith can emerge in the midst of crisis so that no day is dark enough to eclipse the light of God's future. Wow, it's beautiful. Okay. So there is faith can emerge in the midst of crisis, so that no day in dark is enough to eclipse the light of God's future. Okay, so yun. Very nice. So yun. Okay, next, the Deuteronomistic dichotomy. The cutting edge of Deuteronomistic theology is amply illustrated by this quotation from the Deuteronomy, each of which introduces a long series of specific blessing or curses. If you will only obey the Lord, your God, by diligently observing all his commandments that I am commanding you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations of the earth. All these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you. If you obey the Lord your God, blessed shall be in the city, and blessed shall you be in the field. But if you will not obey the Lord your God by diligently observing uh, by decrease, which I am commanding you today, then all these curses shall come upon you to overtake you. Curse shall be upon in the city, and curse shall be in the field. The book of First Samuel focuses on three characters: Samuel, Saul, and David. A poem near a poem near the start of the book reveals the book key themes. God's opposition to proud, uh, God oppositions to the proud, exaltation of the humble, faithfulness in spite of evil, and the promise of messianic king. These themes are played out through the rest of the book as we see Saul's rise to power only to have his character flaws exposed as he disobeyed God's command. In this contrast, God raises up David, a humble shepherd who trusts God. As the story progresses, we see these two characters in increasingly stark contrast. Saul slips into madness as David resolutely trusts in God's timing and purpose. So that's it. Okay. So these are our references for our research or OT survey. Okay.